G'day teacher geeks. If you're like me a few years ago and Bloom's taxonomy tries to underline everything you do in teaching, it might be undermining everything you're doing in teaching. And it's because I found when I got rid of Bloom's out of my lessons and my assessments and I took it down off the wall, suddenly my teaching got better and it got more interesting. And I got to explain the problems with Bloom's taxonomy. Now this was first introduced to me, not Bloom's, the problems with Bloom's was first introduced to me in a seminar I went to with John Hattie, and he explained the Bloom's and he provided a solution to it, which I'm going to explain in a little moment. When he presented the solution, I don't think it's an underestimation to say that my world changed, and that's just what the sort of teacher geek I am, right? The solution to Bloom's taxonomy was suddenly mind-altering, world-shattering for me. But let's come back to this problem with Bloom's. You see, all these bars are touching, right? Now that might seem like a small detail, but what it means is there's no real clear distinction between each of these levels. Now, I like this conceptually, this idea of going from surface to deep learning added a lot to education. We have to distinguish between just being able to memorize and rote learn facts, and we want to get to deeper thinking and understanding. Absolutely, that's fundamental, and so there's a positive here to Bloom's, and that's what it did, right? It gave us this conceptual idea from surface to deep. Problem is, if you were to get 20 students and you got half of them the question apply, and you use the word apply in a question, and the question was designed to get that verb, that level, but then you gave the same content, but you just tweaked the question and used analyze, and then you gave that to a bunch of people to read and teachers to mark and examine, would they be able to distinguish which kid did the application, which kid did the analysis, or which kid was trying to apply, which kid was trying to analyze? Or even so, if we're reading our work, do you have a clear idea of what analysis looks like to application? And more importantly, is that idea, would that be consistent across 1,000 teachers? So for example, when we're marking in the IB, Bloom's taxonomy is the foundation of the IB marking program, but the problem is that it doesn't work. The problem is that it falls down in reality. And this pyramid here is missing synthesis, which is great, but I know it's in some other versions of Bloom's. They updated it. Was that the updated one? I'm not up with the latest news on Bloom's because, like I said, I haven't done it. But analysis and synthesis, what's the difference? Analyze, take things apart, synthesize, put them back together. Well, what does that look like in a kid's answer? And so for me, that's the fundamental problem with Bloom's, is that I don't know what it looks like in students' work. If you have that idea and if you can distinguish between the two and you like this, well, of course, go for it. That's great. But allow me to present a better solution to Bloom's. This is a nice graphic illustration of the SOLO taxonomy. It's not the original graphic illustration. That's this one. We see this, to me, makes perfect intuitive sense. Now I have clearer, I think, scientific, that's not maybe the best word, but I have better operational definitions of what these different levels of learning look like. And when John Hattie presented this in a seminar, I stopped listening to everything else for the next 2 days, and this completely changed my world, and it made so much sense to me, and it solved so many of the problems that I was having at the moment about trying to understand what does critical thinking look like, and how is that different to application, and then how is that different to basically just rote memorizing. This made all the world of sense to me. Pre-structural, you know nothing. Unistructural, you know one thing. Multistructural, you know a few things. Relational, you can make connections to them. And then the extended abstract, you can now apply these relationships in a new context. Now suddenly, doesn't that make so much more sense? That you know one thing, you know two things, you can connect them, now you can apply them. And what this means is in answers, in written work or in student assessment, it's really clear when students do that. Right? So for example, if you're an English teacher, we know, okay, you've just summarized the plot. You haven't made a connection to anything else. And it's the connection part that's key. Anytime you're explaining something, or I pose this question and problem to you, see if this works in your lessons. Look at the next thing you're going to teach. Now, can you break that down into individual units of information at a surface level? Like, what is something? What is this thing? And then is the next step going, okay, but they're having to make it a connection in some way, right? But then even the next level is they're going to have to apply it in some way, or they're going to have to evaluate that connection in some way. Let me give you an example I taught just in my lesson yesterday on smartphones and their effects on our attention span. So I'm teaching psychology to grade 11 students, and I'm trying to teach them a part of the course, which is the effects of digital technology on cognition. I'm turning that into how to study with your smartphone. The basic rule is don't study with your smartphone. And we were doing experiments with kids texting other kids while they're trying to do memory tests, and they can figure out how hard and how distracting it is. But the key is, my first question is, what is working memory? Because students won't be able to give me a detailed explanation of why smartphones mess with their concentration unless they understand what is working memory. So that's my level, right? What is working memory? Can they understand that? I don't have to say what are smartphones because they know what they are, right? So I've got these two things. I've got smartphones and working memory. Okay, they know this one. They probably didn't know working memory, so we had to explain that. Then we get into how and why. How and why do smartphones affect working memory? Suddenly they're having to make the connection there. How will they reduce working memory? Why? Oh, because this to this to this to this, right? And then I go into the but. We say, look at the evidence. We're like, well, does that happen in every context? But look at the type of memory task you were doing. What if you're doing a different memory task, right? And then we get into that more challenging, the challenging areas of questions. When I'm tutoring kids, now I'm explaining to students, so much of what I come back to comes back to this, this model. And I just help show students, okay, would you know this? And do you know this? Yes. And then let's see how they're connected. And if I'm trying to explain across subjects, English, history, psychology. Now, I have to admit that they're the only subjects I teach, so I don't have a huge foundation in the other subjects, but I do know when I'm trying to learn, say I was trying to tutor a kid science and I had to learn it for myself, the first step is, well, what are these things, right? What are the individual bits they need to know? And then we're now having to put them into a sequence. For me, this makes so much more intuitive sense in Bloom's. I can see this across all levels of subjects and grade levels. It has its own flaws. So in the next video, I'm going to explain the better solution to this, which is my own model, which is again, another big cornerstone of the themaNtic model of education, the themaNtic model of curriculum. So I think we can take this and actually take some ideas from Bloom, some ideas from this, put it together, and it's a far better model that should be in all classrooms. I think, hence I'm here explaining it. Problem with Bloom's is there's no clear distinction between the levels. It's nice as a conceptual framework. The solution is a solo taxonomy. One solution is a solo taxonomy because it provides us with a nice clear distinction between surface to deep level and I think a more objectively measurable distinction. The problem with the solo taxonomy, there's not much, but there's a couple. I'm going to explain that in the next video.